This happened to me fairly recently, and I am still trying to make sense of the situation. Several weeks ago, me and my friend set out on a backpacking trip in a nearby state forest. The both of us are very experienced with both backpacking and this specific area of forest we had picked, so we decided to go after work on a Friday, which would leave us hiking most of the 10 miles to the campsite in the dark. The area is very touristy, so pitching a tent anywhere besides the designated camp area wasn't an option and would definitely result in a large ticket from a passing ranger if caught. This wasn't an issue though, since we often start hiking in the dark when we try to chase the sunrise on long backpacking trips, so arriving just before sunset didn't really make any difference to us. So we met up on that same day and set out driving to the state forest. The issues with this trip began there. We ran into terrible rush hour traffic on the highway to the park due to an overturned tractor trailer, which set us back an additional 30 minutes of daylight in what would already be a hike that was intended to be mostly in darkness. Other than this, we arrived at the park without a hiccup and found a spot right away. Then we made our way over to the trailhead and began our ascent. As we hiked and the sky grew dark, there appeared to be an unforeseen storm blowing in from the north. We had anticipated there to be rain later in the night, but it seemed that the front had blown southward, and we were seeing rain earlier than what the forecast on the morning of the trip had projected. It began to rain, which wouldn't have been a big deal, but the rain shower turned into a total downpour. We stopped under a tree where it was semi-dry to turn out the rain layer on our packs and debate whether it was worth it to continue. We reminisced about a time when we got caught in a heavy downpour during a trip, not unlike this one in the Cumberland Gap a few years prior, and decided to keep going so long as there was no thunder. However, as we were walking, about a mile up from our discussion, I noticed that the rain was permeating my old raincoat due to a large tear it had suffered while we were crossing a rock squeeze, and I was beginning to get wet under it. I complained about this to my friend, and he suggested that since we've hiked in the area so frequently that we try to walk off trail to the campsite, since it would be a more direct route. To an inexperienced hiker, this would have been an insane idea, but we had both been in the area enough where we knew that the ascent would be harder, but more direct, and there were no cliffs in the way. So we veered off the trail and began using map and compass navigation to find the campsite. We determined that there would be several checkpoints that we would come across as long as we stayed on the same general path. A creek, an archaeological site for an old town, and another trail that ran directly into the campsite. Once we found the creek, we were able to walk upstream to orient ourselves with a landmark on the creek referenced on the map, catch a bearing with the compass based on that, and keep going from there. At this point, the pouring rain had let up into a lighter shower. It honestly wasn't that bad marching through the forest to the point where we joked back and forth that they had purposefully made the trail harder than actually moving linearly to the campsite, since this part of the forest was a very flat basin between two mountains. After some time of trudging through the damp wilderness, we came across the archaeology site. The town itself had a colonial past and existed up until the 1940s, when the state consolidated the surrounding parkland and made the few residents leave. All that remains now are the abandoned buildings from the 1900s and several dig sites of building foundations from the 18th and 19th centuries, with the single road out of the town that had been torn up to create more natural trails and forest roads. We emerged from the woods on the opposite side of the town we needed to be in, and started making our way down the road to where we could orient ourselves in the correct direction to move toward the last landmark we would use to get to the campsite. We decided that this spot in the town would be a good place to break for a few minutes to drink water and use the bathroom, since the rain had quieted from earlier. And I watched my friend walk slightly out of sight to use the bathroom as I sat on some logs that were arranged to act as a bench as I waited for him. I sat there for some time before I heard him running back in a panic. Thinking that he saw a bear, I quickly mounted my pack and jogged over to meet him to ask him what happened. He told me that he was near the old church at the end of the road on the edge of town and heard a strange noise to his left and saw several sets of glistening eyes, only to turn his headlamp and see that nothing was there. I saw he was really frightened, so I suggested we just keep moving. I thought it was probably some deer that scurried away before he turned his light. Deer have glistening eyes at night when there is a light source like a headlamp nearby. He agreed, and we started in the direction of the trail that we would intersect with. This part of the hike would be significantly more challenging since we had to begin climbing the mountain, which would be an ascent of about 900 feet of net elevation gain from where we were approaching, but at a very steep angle since we were off of any trail. This would go on for slightly less than a mile until we hit the ridge that the trail ran on. As we were climbing the ridge and about 500 feet from the trail, we began to hear a scurrying behind us, which panicked my friend again. We stopped and switched off our headlamps to look behind us, and before my own eyes, there were those glistening eyes my friend had described to me back at the town. I turned on my headlamp and yelled, only to find that nothing was there. Now I was extremely panicked and told my friend that we needed to hurry to the trail quickly. We started at a sprint up the side of this mountain, but periodically we would stop to turn around to see the glistening eyes again. At this point, I had unsheathed the hatchet on my pack that I use for splitting firewood, and we began to slowly make our way to the top as my friend led me up, holding a strap on the bag while I was watching behind us, trying to walk backward up the side of the slope. Eventually, we made it to the top of the ridge where we met the trail. We turned around and again saw these eyes. There were more of them from my last sighting, but we were no longer being pursued. They remained several hundred feet down the ridge where we were minutes prior. At that instant, a shrieking noise that sounded like hundreds of cicadas emanated from the same direction, and the eyes had disappeared from our sight. Me and my friend didn't even say anything or look at one another as we both took off running for the campsite now that we were on the level trail. When we got to the campsite, we were relieved to see that other people were there but said nothing of the incident to them. We figured they would probably take us as skittish flatlanders that got scared by a pack of deer. We set up camp extremely close to others that were set up there for the night, but by morning it was clear that neither of us slept, as my friend shared when we were preparing breakfast. We eventually decided against the original itinerary for the following day, and tagged along with another group since they were heading to the same parking lot to leave. When we got off the mountain, we went straight to a park office to get some clarity on what had happened the night before. We tried as level-headedly as possible to explain to the ranger at the desk what had happened the night prior, but the ranger started to talk about bears in the area and how it was foolish of us to be off trail at night. Probably true. When we pressed further about how we had seen bears before and this incident was no bear, the ranger switched his tone. He began to intensely ask us about our whereabouts during the occurrence, and based on his line of questioning, it was clear to me that he had no interest in what happened and was trying to get an angle to write us a ticket for being at the archaeology site. This had happened to me before when talking to rangers, since they can get pretty ticket happy due to the park being so well traveled. I immediately broke off the conversation and insisted the ranger was probably right about it being a bear, and admonished myself and my friend for being out at night. We left the ranger station with even more questions than answers about the night prior, but we avoid that area entirely now when hiking or backpacking in that park, especially at night.
If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more bone-chilling stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe.